them against. But it's incredibly important to run that race. Other questions? Ma'am?
Is there any research on differences when full guardianship is carried out by families versus like the state? Because I'm a case manager for the brain injury waivers here, and on my very small, little realm, I noticed that state guardians probably give more choice and options. They don't force any of my clients to do anything, and the client's like, no, I don't want to do it. So I didn't know if there's research showing differences.
I haven't seen longitudinal studies on that. The examples we have are anecdotal, which isn't always fair, but often come from lack of familiarity by state and larger professional guardians. There was one case in Washington where an organizational guardian wanted to have all of the wards living in one congregate setting and then tried to bill for advocating against community integration, saying it's in their best interest to live where I put them. And thankfully they lost. But there is the risk with large, I just had an article published on how organizational guardians in those situations can be violating Olmstead. Jenny Hatch's guardian for a while was an organization, the one that said you'll live here and you won't work and you won't do those things. Well, if we assume that unjustified institutional isolation is discrimination, to quote the Olmstead Court, what can be more isolating than saying you're going to live where I tell you, see who I tell you, and work where I tell you? It's the definition of isolation. So there have been studies on the isolating effects of guardianship. I have not seen any looking at professional guardians versus family guardians. There is an interesting study that was done years ago, though, on professional guardians in general, state by state by state. It was done by the ABA and some others. And they kind of it was a survey done of the states and of the guardians. And although it's out of date now, I would never say it's definitive. At the time, it found pretty heavy Olmstead problems. Other questions?
In state and family here? And
it was public. It was just done of public guardians. It did not compare and contrast. It was a study basically designed to look at what public guardianship looks like. Do you have something?
Well, I guess it's more of, I guess it is sort of a question. So I'm looking at strategies to educate the judges during the restoration process about supported decision making. And here in Kentucky, just so you know, we're one of the few states that originally, when the petition is filed for your rights to be taken away and to be appointed a guardian, it's still a jury trial here, which is very rare. And we advocate to continue the use of the jury trial, the option of jury trial. But the restoration, of course, is a bench trial. And I'm looking at a couple of persons who are under public guardianship. We have about 4,000 persons here who are under public guardianship. And going through this process and introducing to the court the concept of supported decision making. I'm even looking at utilizing video to convey my message of giving this person the opportunity to have their rights back and why it's important, and introducing that. So I'm looking for ways to do that, to get the judge and the court to hear and understand supported decision making in the best manner.
I can't agree more that you need to actually bring examples to life. And we're going to end this part of the process with this part of the position with this, a brief break afterward. I encourage strongly to get Kentucky to move for a WINGS grant. WINGS is done through the ABA and some other organizations. It is for state courts to create work groups around alternatives to guardianship. I can give you a contact if you want. But the whole idea there is to get courts talking. I've lectured to multiple WINGS groups. I had the former chief judge of Wisconsin saying, oh my God, we never actually considered this. And judges, like everyone else, really want to do the right thing, right? So you present the studies, and I love the idea of kind of day in the life videos. We're working on doing stuff like that now to just bring home the message, because really it's hard to change 2,000 years in 40. People will still tell you, I think it's for protection, it's a good thing. I was in the Virginia protection and advocacy system for 14 years. I never really considered guardianship. It wasn't on the radar, right, wrong, or indifferent. It wasn't until Jenny found me and I realized just what it means to take away a person's rights. It means the difference between working where I've always worked and working where I'm told to work. That's a fundamental right. It makes us who we are. So I think when judges can understand that, and judges have to get past the protection angle. You're always going to hear this when you advocate for supported decision making. You're going to hear, well, how am I going to make sure the supporter isn't exercising undue influence? How can I guarantee safety? Don't lie. Answer is you can't. I guarantee you right now, today, there is a person who is being abused by his or her supporter. Guarantee it. Well, I'll tell you this. We also know there are people being abused by guardians. There are studies on articles on guardianship abuse. So I'm not going to tell you that you're 100% safe. And by the way, undue influence by your supporters and friends, if that is the criteria upon which we're going to judge independence, and my friends get me to do stupid things, I got to cancel my poker game. Okay? I got to cancel my guys' weekends. We do stupid things. Okay? But here's the thing. If I know there is danger in independence and choice, and I know there is danger in dependence and lack of rights, aren't you going to, all things being equal, pick the one that studies have shown is more likely to make you safer? Apples to apples, aren't you going to pick the option that is more likely to lead to you being more healthy? Of course you are. It's the difference between full-fat ice cream and low-fat ice cream. They taste the same. You're going to go, the one that's going to kill you slower. Right? So that's the message we have to get out. There is no panacea, and we cannot be held to what I call argument by impossibility of perfection. We cannot perfect to the point of safety, bubble wrapped around a person. Here's the point I make. Do we really, really, really think having a guardian keeps you from doing what you want to do and getting a drink if you want to get a drink? These are not the guardians of the galaxy. Okay? Nobody is there. No guardian is able to wrap bubble tape around you and keep you ever from getting hurt. It does not work that way. What we should be doing is empowering self-determination, which we know can make you safer. And then we limit the opportunities for abuse. Not cancel the possibility, but we limit the opportunities. Why don't we take a few minutes and we'll come back and talk a little bit more. Thank you so much for starting.
You're ready. Ready to go. You're live.
Back. First of all, encouraging sign number one, you all did in fact come back. Pop of the world, Mom. So for the last hour, we talked about what I think I call the whys of supported decision-making, why it's important, why we need to pursue this. And by the fact that you all came back, I'm hoping that you all agree it's a good thing. Well, the second part of our presentation I call the hows, how we can implement supported decision-making in a number of spheres of life to make it a part of a person's life from pre-K to end-of-life planning. I only offer one warning and an apology. We've only got an hour. I've done trainings on these that go a full day, so please forgive me for clearly rushing through the topic, but I think we can get some good examples. Okay, let's start with special education. A supported decision-making could and should be a major part of special ed. I'm going to start all of these with what I call an article of faith. Okay? And here is a study, and something that, once again, we know it is undeniable. Students in transition, teens, young adults, who have more self-determination are more likely to be employed, more likely to be independent, more likely to have more positive living outcomes. That was a study from as far back as almost 20 years ago. It has been followed up multiple times. This is true. We also know that the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, has as its primary purpose the obligation where schools must ensure that students receive services reasonably calculated to enable the child to receive educational benefits. Those language are the bane of many special ed lawyer. It comes from a Supreme Court decision called Rowley, but I believe it's actually helpful. Because what is an educational benefit? Congress has already told us. Look at the law. The whole point of the IDEA is to ensure that children can get an education that, look at the bold, prepares them for further education, employment, and independent living. That's what schools have to do. They have to give every student what they need to be prepared to work and to live independently. Therefore, as multiple studies and commentaries have found, the whole point of SPED, of special education, is to empower, encourage, and make a reality self-determination. Self-determination is the ultimate goal of education. It is a best practice in education, and schools should focus on ways to make students more self-determined. And yet, we have seen multiple studies say that the main source, the number one source for guardianship referrals, schools. I was just part of that 2015 study and paper. Undeniably, the number one place where people are being told to get guardianship, teachers and school personnel. So what we need to do to ensure self-determination is I call closing down the on-ramp. Because if you've got kids who are self-determined from a young age, who have grown to expect self-determination, who want self-determination, who make their own decisions, then guardianship isn't even an option. Because they're used to making their own decisions. They demand to make their own decisions. And we should be doing this as soon as possible. DC Public Schools starts it in pre-K. And I will tell you that DC Public Schools, until 2 years ago, had a written policy on transfer of rights where they would tell parents, go to the probate court, get guardianship. It was in writing. If there was any concerns about decision-making, refer for guardianship. It took us threatening legal action and working with them, and they have done wonderful work. Their head of transition now says proudly that we do self-determination curricula in pre-K. We've got nursery school kids talking about their networks to make decisions. And I always say, that sounds funny, I know. Getting support to pick milk or juice sounds kind of funny. But you're a little kid, and you already know that you have a right to choose milk or juice and a right to have a network to help you make that choice of milk or juice. And as you get older and the decisions get more complex, it's part of your DNA. You expect to make those decisions. You expect to be self-determined, and guardianship is not an option. So when I talk to advocates, to school personnel, I tell you self-determination should be a goal. Every child in special education has a right to an individualized education plan, or IEP, with goals and objectives for the year. There should be self-determination goals. Why? Because the purpose of the IDEA is to prepare you for independent living. So every goal you have should have self-determination components. We need to get away from reflexive goals that make the student an object and make the student the subject. I call them I statements. Think about it. Instead of saying you use proper grammar, or even I will use proper grammar, put the student in charge. I will identify a subject I want to write about and use proper grammar and punctuation in my stories 3 out of every 4 times. It's a little change, right? We have measurable goals always, 3 out of 4 times. We have the usual goals of use proper grammar, but look, it puts the kid front and center. I will identify a subject. I will work to do this. Instead of saying, I won't be late, or don't be late, or reduce your tardies, I will develop a plan for reducing the number of times I am late for class. It's a little thing, but look what it does. It requires the student to come up with the language, and it makes the student accountable. Teacher can say to the student, what's your plan? Why haven't you followed a plan? Things aren't being done to the student. Things are being done by the student. The student is the causal agent, doing things rather than having things done to them. The very definition of self-determination. So what do we do here? Okay, how do we come up with our goals? We have an IEP, and the latest, greatest thing in special ed, the best practice we're all told to do, is the student-led IEP, right? Student sits at the front of the table, parents and advocates and teachers and professionals around the table, they're all working together to come up with the best possible education plan, goals, and objectives, right? What does that sound like? Does that not sound like supported decision-making? Everyone working with the student, because the student leads the meeting, the student identifies goals, hell, the student... we've seen best practices where, from the beginning, the student should, at a minimum, introduce the people at the table. Call on them like a board of directors, because the student is then in charge. So, how do we get there? If you're a school, how do we do it? If you're a parent or an advocate, how do I ask for it? Answer, ask for it. From the beginning. What is your self-determination curriculum? How will you ensure, quoting the IDEA, my child is prepared for further education, employment, and independent living? What are the goals going to be like? Ask for them. And get that student involved in the IEP process from day one. I believe that a pre-kindergartner can come to his or her IEP meeting for as long as that kid can sit there, even to say, my name is. Older kids can contribute to the present level of performance, can say what they want, and if a kid doesn't like going, that child can speak into a tape recorder, can write down, can give a message, can say, I want you to say this. That voice has to be heard. We always say you have to own your plan. This is a chance for a kid to do that from a young age. And why is that important? Because you develop an expectation and a practice of self-determination, where we're not even considering taking rights away because we are busy empowering those rights. And think about it. Think about how you can do this. You have a right as a parent, as an advocate. A school has an obligation to do appropriate evaluations. We always see the need to do evaluations. Well, if we know that self-determination and independent living are goals of IDEA, should we not be doing evaluations on self-determination and independent living skills? If there is any doubt, this is why schools always anger me when they are the ones recommending guardianship at 18. So I was asked the same question. You've had this kid for how many years? You had concerns. It either happened just today, you decided this child needs a guardian, or you've been worried about this for years. And if you were, where was the evaluation? Where were you meeting your obligations to help that child develop and receive independent living skills? You get an evaluation that way, and you can put that in writing. Dear school, I believe student has limitations that is keeping student from developing independent living skills, and I ask that you do an evaluation to determine that. And you know what? The school then has two options. Do the evaluation or take the kid to due process. That's it. Evaluations are not optional under IDEA. You ask. That's how you get self-determination skills. Heck, you can have the child ask and have the child exercise self-determination. You know what happens if you don't like the evaluation you get? You have the right to a new one. Do school part 2. Because if a parent or an advocate disagrees with an evaluation, you have the right to ask for an independent evaluation at the school's expense from someone you select. And the school has to consider that evaluation. And once again, when you ask, the school has two choices. Give you the evaluation or take you to due process. That's it. This is an invaluable tool to help learn what the person you're working with can do and what they have limitations doing, what they need help in. And if you know what someone needs help in, you can provide support to help them get it. You can provide decision-making and independent living support. So if you are advocating for a child, if you're representing a child, if you're working with a child, special education is one of your friends. Because you can say to the school, I'm worried about this child's ability to live independently. You have an obligation to teach independent living schools. Let's figure out what those are. This is your chance to do that from a young age and close that on-ramp. Okay? What does this have to do with supported decision-making? Quick review, folks. What is supported decision-making? Okay? Sitting around the table, right? Helping the person understand the choices they make, decisions they have to make. There I go, quoting myself again. Well, when we talk about a student-led IEP, doesn't that sound the same? Doesn't a student-led IEP sound just like supported decision-making? Sitting around, discussing, coming up with the best possible plan with the student leading the process? That's our chance. And the on-ramp to guardianship is there really for one reason and one reason only. Guardianship, the primary reason for it, when we get down to brass tacks, is we assume that someone is not able to take care of him or herself. They don't have what they need to take care of themselves in a manner society believes is appropriate. Can we break that down to brass tacks? Right? That's why guardianship happens. Well, what does that have to do with SPED? We already know what the purpose of IDEA is, to help you prepare for further education, further employment, independent living skills. Well, there is an entire special education program devoted to just that. Transition services. Once again, Congress has shown us the way. Transition services are instruction and services that help you develop Post-school, after you graduate. Living objectives and, when appropriate, acquisition of daily living skills. It is the obligation of the school in transition to help you be independent later. I always say transition is the most important part of the special education process. You have a right to special education until age 22, correct? You're probably going to live until age 77. So transition is setting you up for the next 55 years. It is the chance to develop post-school daily living skills. We have the chance, and it begins no later than 16. It can be before that. States have, DC, for example, law in Virginia starts at 14. You can start before then. You can ask the school to begin transition planning from a very early age if it is appropriate. And it goes at least until the student turns 21. You've got 5 years. So I say again, why are schools the number one referral source to guardianship if they've had years to identify this problem, evaluate it, come up with a course of action, and teach the acquisition of daily living skills? This means, to me, and I think it's pretty clear, that supported decision-making is something that should be a part of the school process from an early age and focused on as we get to transition. Because what do we know about daily living skills? We know that the more self-determined you are, the better you are at them. We know that self-determination is the ultimate end of education. And we know that supported decision-making can increase self-determination. So not only is it a best practice, I believe it is an obligation. I believe if we're not asking our schools what they are doing to make this happen, we're doing a disservice to our students. Their schools aren't doing it, they're doing a disservice to their students. Any questions about special education? Let's talk about Voc Rehab. Voc Rehab, I have to warn, is my favorite program for people with disabilities. I get a lot of eye rolls when I talk about that, but let me show you what I mean. Okay? Article of Faith. Wouldn't it be awesome if there was a program for people with disabilities of any age and any disability that was able to give them any services and supports they need to be independent without limitation? Wouldn't that be awesome? There is. The Voc Rehab program. I know it sounds weird, but bear with me. Purpose of the Voc Rehab program is to help people work. It is designed to assess and plan and provide services that will help people become employed. Pure and simple. It is there to help people, and these are the magic words, prepare for, secure, retain, advance in, or regain employment. Prepare, obtain, retain. This is the job of the Voc Rehab Agency, and they have the power, I will tell you, to give you anything that you need to accomplish those goals. They have vast powers. Work. It's all about work. So what does work have to do with supported decision-making? What does work have to do with guardianship? Why is Voc Rehab such an important component in ensuring supported decision-making? Well, what if the things that are keeping you from working are also keeping you from living independently? What if the very things that are limiting you in making your decisions and living your life independently and community integrated are the things keeping you from working? If that's the case, then they have to provide it. If your lack of self-determination or decision-making skills is limiting your ability to work, the VR program has an obligation to help you obtain the skills you need to overcome that problem. That means, as I started with, the VR program, done correctly, and I submit to you, lots of them aren't, the VR program, done correctly, has more potential to do more good for more people to help them live independent, free, and community-integrated lives. Here's why. First of all, quick refresher on the program. Eligibility. You can get VR if you have a disability, you want to work, and VR will help you work. That's the easiest eligibility program in the world. Disability, want to work, it will help you work. If you receive SSI or SSDI, you are presumed eligible. You actually skip those steps. It's really hard to be ineligible. You don't have to prove you can work. They have to prove you can't. Then before they can do that, they have to give you a chance to work. They've got to put you to work in a number of areas that meet your preferred methods and your areas where you want to work. And if they don't, they're violating the law. Then once you are found eligible, you have a right to an individualized plan for employment, or IPE. Sorry for the acronyms. I know it sounds like IEP. IPE is Individualized Plan for Employment. It lays out the person's goal, the job the person wants to get. And I capitalized that for a reason that we'll get to in a sec. The person is capitalized because I ain't just talking about any job. Any VR organization that puts you to a job and says they've done their job hasn't. It is the job chosen by the person in a field the person has an interest in. They have an obligation to help you work in the field in which you wish to work. So I always say to people, not just any job, your job. We see way too many VR organizations putting people in what I call 4F jobs. Food, filth, flowers, and filing. You're slinging hash. You're working in an office, you are sweeping floors, or food, filth, or you're working in a flower shop. I have no idea why they're so into flower shops, but we see a lot of florist jobs in VR. It's not that way. They cannot say, we're going to put you in a job and 90 days later we're going to close you. No. You have to be satisfied, one, with the job, and two, with the outcome. A job may be a stepping stone to another job. So you plan to succeed. The IPE doesn't just say the job I want, but the services and supports I need to acquire it. So they're required to say, one, these are the things that are keeping you from working. This is where you want to work. This is what you need to get there. And this is what we're going to provide you to get there. If they don't do that, they're not doing their job. And I say this from the experience of someone who tells VR agencies, you're not doing your job a lot. That can cover a lot. Once again, Congress is our friend. They've laid out the services and supports VR agencies are supposed to provide, and they are vast. If it will help you work, they provide assessments and counseling and job counseling. Yes, that means medical and mental health care. I have gotten VR agencies to cover dental care. I have gotten psychiatric care and medications covered. I have gotten rent covered because it kept someone from working to be homeless. Medical and mental health care assistive technology. It can cover job coaches, services to family members. I've gotten VR to cover daycare. So if it's keeping you from working, if it's in your way, they can provide it. And here's what I consider to be the most important one when it comes to self-determination. They have to provide vocational and other training services, including the provision of personal and vocational adjustment services, if it's going to help a person work. Not just voc training, personal training, personal adjustment training. So we hear a lot of VR offices refusing training because it's not work-related. That's not work-related. The self-determination thing, that's not work-related. We teach work skills. Well, that's what they say. What does this have to do with work? What does this supported decision-making have to do with vocational rehabilitation? And again, I tell you the key concept in voc rehab is informed choice. It's why I keep putting person in all caps. The key concept in voc rehab is that voc rehab counselor must work with the person and give the person the information so the person can choose his or her goal. They have an obligation to defer to the person's choices. So it is a person-driven plan focusing on the person making informed decisions about the services and supports he or she gets. And what does that sound like? It's like supported decision-making, doesn't it? Working with the counselor. Counselor gives me information so I can make choices. It is supported decision-making. And remember, we know that means more self-determination. We know, especially with regard to voc rehab, people with more self-determination are more likely to be employed at better jobs. Therefore, is not self-determination an obligation of VR agencies? Should not VR agencies be empowering self-determination? And here's an example. I'm going to tell you a war story. I apologize. Independent living skills. We know why people are put under guardianship. We discussed that before, because they can't take care of themselves in the way that society deems is appropriate. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's more than that. Because what if what's in your way of working are your lack of life skills? Right? What if you're not working because you can't take care of yourself? You have bad health or hygiene. You have poor organization, communication, or interpersonal skills. What if these things are in the way of you working? And I always get head scratching. How is taking care of yourself an employment skill? How is hygiene an employment skill or self-organization? I always say, would you hire a person who can't get along with the other workers? If you hired someone and they couldn't get along with the workers, wouldn't you fire them? Would you hire somebody who is so disorganized they can't keep track of their work-related tasks? Of course not. And once they prove to be disorganized, wouldn't you fire them? Would you hire someone who is constantly sick and missing work, or fire someone who was, or had such poor hygiene they were offending the customers? Of course you would. These are employment skills. They are life skills and they are employment skills. So here's my story. I worked with a young man, just turning 18, graduated high school. It's a long story. I'll cut down to the most salient facts. He worked with his VR counselor. VR counselor said, okay, you're graduating high school, we need to figure out what you're going to do next. And they did an assessment of him, and it turned out he had real limitations in interpersonal skills, communication, organization, and self-care. He was really bad at it. And these were the things they found were his limitations. So his stepbrother, who worked with him, said, I found this school in New York that teaches a vocational program as well as these independent living skills that you say limit him. And the counselor actually goes, I'll do an investigation, sounds great. Right up until they saw the tuition was $70,000 a year. When all of a sudden is, we're not going to pay for this because these are independent living skills. These are not work skills. You know, the ability to wash your clothing and take care of yourself and hygiene is not an employment skill. So we're going to tube this entire thing that, by the way, we encouraged you to sign up for and incur debt for. We had to go through a long trial on this because, as it turned out, less than 5 minutes after he appealed the decision and I made my presence known, they closed his case. So we had like a 5-day trial on this. And it came down to this, the one issue. Would you hire someone who has trouble getting along with coworkers? Because you, VR, have already said this is a problem of his. Would you hire someone who's so disorganized they can't keep their work tasks steady? Because you, VR, said that's a problem. End of the day, we won. Court said, yes, these are so-called independent living skills, but these so-called independent living skills are the very ones that they say are keeping him from working. So when I say to you again that VR has more ability to do more things for more people, I mean it. Because if it's in your way of work, they've got to help you overcome that. How do we do it? Through informed choice, through assessments, through evaluations, through supports and services the person chooses, like programs, like technology, like medical and mental health care. Like I said, I have gotten things like rent and clothing covered, dental care covered, because they've been identified as being in the way of work. So we put it together. The VR program and the person work together to help the person use informed choice, to pick the jobs he or she wants, to identify the things keeping them from getting them and from accessing the services, including those independent living skills that might be in the way. And when we do that, what are we doing? We're helping the person get employed. But secondarily, we are helping the person develop those independent living skills that help them take care of themselves in a way society deems is appropriate and therefore avoid guardianship. By the way, VR goes hand in hand with special education. The VR organization is required to develop a plan to work with the school to become involved in transition, quote, as soon as possible. If you're working with kids in special ed and you don't have VR at your IEP meetings, they need to be there. Don't let them say, we'll send a letter or something. I would not hold back. I would demand them to have a full report on what they're going to do. The system is set up to go from special ed to VR, so it's seamless. Remember, transition services, employment, independent living skills for the rest of your life. Any questions on voc rehab?